Liam Vanderbilt walked the glass and steel hallways of his family skyscraper with purposeful strides, as if he owned not just the building, but the entire world. Employees lowered their gaze when he passed, intimidated by his proud posture and well-known arrogance. To Liam, this empire wasn't a legacy to protect, but a stage on which to display his superiority. In his mind, money was synonymous with absolute power. In the president's office, decorated with cold marble and imposing paintings, Liam sat in the leather chair inherited from his father. He looked out at the city below, as if everyone walking the streets were mere extras in his story. He felt invincible, believing no crisis could shake the Vanderbilt empire. After all, he believed problems were just opportunities to prove his dominance. The board of directors, concerned, was beginning to question his leadership ability. In meetings, Liam wore a sarcastic smile, downplaying alarming reports. To him, experts were nothing more than mercenaries looking for an easy payday. Arrogance was his armor, and any sign of vulnerability was treated as weakness. The young heir seemed more committed to defending his ego than to facing reality. Still, something was eluding him. The shadow of his father, Robert Vanderbilt, loomed over every decision. Although officially retired, the patriarch watched from a distance, waiting to see if his son was capable of sustaining the empire. Liam, however, saw only himself in the mirror of power. Deep down, though, a sense of unease was beginning to creep in. Every protest, every negative headline was eating away at his confidence, though he would never admit it. Behind the insolent smile, Liam feared his authority was being questioned. The feeling that everyone was waiting for him to fail haunted him like a silent ghost. And it was precisely in this context of growing pressure that a name came up. Elena Rossi. A renowned environmental engineering expert, she had a reputation for solving problems considered unsolvable. The board suggested hiring her, and Liam, with contempt, agreed, if only to prove that no expert could teach him anything. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. Liam, convinced it would be just another chance to reaffirm his superiority, prepared as if for a duel. In his mind, Elena was just another dreamer, incapable of understanding the grandeur of the empire he commanded.
The young Vanderbilt had no idea that this meeting would change everything. The ego that sustained him was about to be tested in a way he could never have predicted. The arrogance that had been his greatest shield was about to become his downfall. And so, with the weight of his fortune on his shoulders and pride burning in his chest, Liam waited for the moment he would face the woman who would shake his foundations. Unknowingly, he was walking straight into the first major shock of his life. Do you believe that pride always wins over reason? Subscribe to the channel and keep following this story to discover just how far Liam's arrogance will take him. Elena Rossi entered the conference room with a firm posture, completely unintimidated by the opulent luxury surrounding her. She was dressed simply, but her eyes held the confidence of someone who was a master in her field. To her, there was no difference between solving a problem for a small community or for a billion-dollar empire. The principles of truth and science were the same. Liam watched her arrogantly, leaning back in his leather chair with a smug smile on his face. His first words were not a welcome, but a provocation. He wanted to test her nerve. "So, you're the expert who's come to save my empire?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Elena didn't flinch. She laid detailed reports, charts, and projections on the table, demonstrating her complete command of the situation. She explained how the company's current practices were leading to an inevitable collapse.
Her explanation was clear, direct, and impossible to ignore. For a moment, even the other directors in the room leaned in to listen carefully. But Liam wasn't interested in solutions. He wanted a spectacle. He interrupted Elena multiple times, mocking her proposals. "Interesting, but do you really think you can solve in a few days what generations of industrialists couldn't?" he said, laughing and looking at the others as if seeking their agreement. Elena, however, remained calm. Her eyes locked with Liam's, and her voice didn't waver. "This isn't about what I think, Mr. Vanderbilt. It's about what the facts show. And they are clear. We change, or your fortune turns to dust in a matter of years." The firmness of her reply made the heir grow heavy with silence. The heir, irritated, decided to raise the stakes. With a dismissive gesture, he issued the challenge: solve the crisis in 72 hours, offering $5 million in return. The board members exchanged shocked glances, but Liam just smiled, convinced she would back down. To his surprise, Elena didn't hesitate. "I accept," she replied, looking him directly in the eyes. There was no arrogance in her voice, only conviction. The entire room seemed to shudder at the specialist's audacity. For a moment, Liam's smile vanished, but he quickly regained his composure, masking his discomfort with a loud laugh. "Excellent! I look forward to seeing this miracle happen." Deep down, however, a seed of doubt had begun to eat away at his confidence. As Elena left the room with her head held high, Liam realized there was something different about her. She wasn't like the other experts who bowed to his power. She carried something he couldn't quite define, and it unsettled him. The battle of egos had begun, and the relentless 72-hour deadline was already ticking. The clock seemed louder in that conference room, marking the start of the countdown. Elena had left with determined steps, while Liam remained seated, trying to mask his tension with a strained smile. The board members were still murmuring in shock, unable to believe the specialist's audacity. To them, it was a game lost from the very beginning. Liam rose slowly, snapping his fingers as if closing a case that was already won. In his mind, Elena would crash and burn under the impossible deadline. 3 days. This should be fun, he muttered, ignoring the worried looks from the directors. His confidence was so immense that the challenge felt more like a joke than a real risk. Meanwhile, Elena walked through the busy streets of Manhattan, absorbing the weight of the responsibility she had just taken on. The biting cold didn't bother her. Her mind was already working on strategies. For her, it wasn't just about the money or beating Liam. It was about showing that science could transform even the most hostile situations. That night, Liam gathered some friends at an exclusive club. Between laughs and glasses of champagne, he told the story of the challenge, painting Elena as a fool. The others laughed, but a restless look in Liam's eyes revealed something else. A seed of doubt he was trying to drown in alcohol and arrogance. Elena, on the other hand, buried herself in documents and reports until the early hours. Every detail was a puzzle she needed to solve quickly. She knew she would face resistance within the company, and that many were waiting to see her fail. But the conviction to prove her worth gave her energy. As the clock kept ticking, Liam remembered Elena's steady gaze. That woman didn't seem intimidated, and it bothered him. Behind the jokes, a growing unease lingered. What if she actually succeeded? The thought irritated him deeply because it challenged his sense of superiority. The board, divided between supporting and sabotaging Elena, saw the challenge as an opportunity to observe both the heir and the specialist. Some directors believed she might bring useful solutions. Others were just waiting for the spectacle of her failure. The entire empire seemed to be holding its breath. Liam tried to maintain his composure, but with every passing hour, his confidence that Elena would fail began to weaken. He wouldn't admit it out loud, but he felt he had underestimated his adversary. His arrogance, however, wouldn't allow him to back down. The relentless 72-hour deadline had become a taut rope stretched between pride and competence. And without realizing it, Liam was about to be pulled into the very game he had created. The silent war between the heir and the specialist had officially begun.
At dawn the next day, Elena gathered her team in a small, makeshift office. The space was modest, but it buzzed with the energy of a nearly impossible mission. Charts covered the walls, laptops flashed with updated data, and the sound of typing filled the room. Elena radiated determination, turning the impossible into tangible goals. Her assistant, Maya Torres, looked at her with both admiration and concern. 72 hours is nothing, Elena. They want you to fail, she said, trying to persuade her to back down. Elena just smiled, confident. That's exactly why we can't fail. The conviction in her voice was contagious. Elena's plan involved a direct attack on the heart of the problem: factory pollution and resource waste. It combined advanced technological solutions with smart repurposing, something that could turn things around if implemented. However, she knew every detail would be scrutinized through the lens of Liam's distrust. Meanwhile, Liam spent his morning in his luxury penthouse, occupied with superficial phone calls and social meetings. He tried to convince himself there was no reason to worry about Elena. She won't last 2 days, he repeated to himself, but the restlessness in his eyes betrayed him. Back in the office, Elena worked tirelessly. The atmosphere was tense, but her leadership kept the team focused. Every obstacle they encountered was met with creativity. Maya watched in amazement at how Elena transformed complex data into clear solutions. By nightfall, the first results began to appear. Projections showing reduced costs and efficient resource repurposing were getting attention. It was only the beginning, but it was enough to show there was hope. Elena, however, knew the real challenge still lay ahead, presenting something so irrefutable that even Liam would have to acknowledge it. In the Vanderbilt skyscraper, rumors spread through the hallways. Employees whispered about the specialist's boldness, some quietly rooting for her success, others eagerly waiting to see her fail. The mood within the company was one of anticipation and tension. Liam received reports about Elena's progress, but he laughed as he read the initial analyses. She thinks she can change decades of tradition in 3 days? How naive! Yet deep down, a flicker of curiosity made him reread every line more carefully than he cared to admit. While Manhattan slept, Elena kept working, her eyes tired but her resolve firm. Every chart, every number, every projection was a battle won against time and disbelief. She knew her victory wouldn't just be technical, it would be symbolic too. The countdown continued. The first day was over, but the real confrontation between intelligence and arrogance was just beginning.
On the morning of the second day, Elena realized something strange was happening. Important documents had vanished from the digital archives, and some factory data was incomplete. After investigating, she discovered that certain data had been intentionally blocked by internal departments. Sabotage was underway. Maya entered the office with a distressed expression, carrying contradictory reports. "They're trying to slow us down," she said, slapping the papers on the desk. Elena took a deep breath, maintaining her composure. "It was expected. They're afraid of what we might reveal, but if they think this will stop me, they're mistaken." Her voice carried the strength of steel. Meanwhile, Liam was receiving calls from more conservative board members. "This woman is dangerous," they insisted, trying to persuade him to terminate the challenge. He refused, however. To Liam, it was more interesting to watch her get lost in the maze alone. The power game amused him. though he'd quietly begun feeling curious about her progress. Back in Elena's office, the team doubled their efforts. They worked around each obstacle with clever solutions, but time seemed to slip through their fingers. The relentless deadline became an invisible enemy. Maya, exhausted, questioned whether it was worth continuing, but Elena reminded her they were facing a historic opportunity. News about the challenge began circulating discreetly among journalists and environmental activists. Small leaks about the bet fueled rumors. The Vanderbilt empire, already weakened by environmental scandals, found itself under even greater scrutiny. The pressure on Elena increased, but so did her determination to succeed. By day's end, Elena had managed to recover some of the lost data, reconstructing information by cross-referencing old reports. Her quick thinking impressed the team. It's like solving a puzzle with missing pieces, but you can still see the complete picture. In the Vanderbilt building, Liam monitored from a distance, requesting daily reports. Pretending disinterest, he read each update with a mixture of scorn and anxiety. With each advancement Elena made, he felt his ego being pricked. "She's farther from failure than I expected," he thought, irritated. That night, Elena stared at the wall covered with notes and diagrams. She was exhausted, but a spark remained in her eyes. "Solving the problem isn't enough. I need to prove to them that knowledge and courage are worth more than fortune," she murmured. For her, this was more than a bet. It was a battle of principles. Liam, in his luxury penthouse, looked out through the glass window at the lights of New York. His reflection showed not just arrogance, but also a flicker of doubt. Elena was beginning to occupy his mind in a way he couldn't explain. The first barriers had been thrown up, and Elena, against all odds, remained steadfast. This war wasn't just against time, it was against an entire system betting on her failure.
The next morning, Liam walked into his office with his usual confidence, but his mind was unsettled. An assistant handed him reports on Elena's progress. He scanned them quickly, searching for flaws, but found only consistent data. This irritated him deeply. "She shouldn't be getting this far," he thought, frowning. In the boardroom, directors were speaking in hushed tones, some already leaning toward supporting Elena. "She has bold ideas. Perhaps she's worth listening to," one of them said. Liam slammed his hand on the table, cutting the discussion short. "No one decides anything until the deadline passes. This is my game, and she will lose it." Pride still dictated his words. Yet something inside him was beginning to waver. He remembered the steadiness in Elena's gaze when she faced him, how she never yielded to his sarcasm. It was a demeanor he rarely encountered, even among powerful men. That image haunted him more than he cared to admit. Elena, for her part, remained focused. She had spent the night reviewing calculations and mapping out solutions. Her eyes were tired, but her mind stayed sharp. For her, this challenge wasn't just professional, it was personal. Proving that even an empire could bow to the truth was her greatest motivation. As she worked, Elena received an anonymous call warning her about more serious internal sabotage. She thanked the caller but maintained her composure in front of the team. She didn't want fear to undermine their focus. Her leadership balanced strength and hope. Liam, isolated in his penthouse, tried to convince himself he had nothing to fear. He called friends, made social plans, and filled his time with trivialities. But with every forced laugh, he remembered Elena's steady voice. His pride wouldn't let him admit it, but she was already getting to him. As the second day progressed, Elena's results began to solidify. Economic models showed her proposal could reduce costs and prevent millions in fines. The team celebrated, but Elena only smiled faintly. "We haven't won yet. The real battle will be in front of Liam." That evening, Liam reviewed the reports again, a knot forming in his stomach. He didn't want to believe it, but the impossible seemed to be happening. No, There's no way she can pull this off, he muttered to himself, clenching his fists. Pride remained his shield, but it was starting to feel like a prison. Every line Elena wrote felt like a blow to his self-confidence. The game that once seemed amusing had become an uncomfortable mirror. And so, by the end of the second day, the tension between arrogance and truth reached its peak. The deadline loomed closer, and Liam, though he'd never admit it, was beginning to fear for his own reputation. In the quiet of the night, Elena was reviewing reports when she noticed something intriguing. Buried in internal documents were subtle references to confidential meetings with Robert Vanderbilt, the patriarch. Curious, she investigated further and confirmed it was. He had been monitoring everything, watching her steps, and most importantly, evaluating his own son.
The discovery surprised her, but it also brought clarity. This wasn't just a personal challenge between her and Liam. A bigger test was underway, orchestrated by the man who had built the empire. Robert wanted to see how far Liam would go and whether he had the humility to learn. Elena considered the weight of this revelation. She knew that at some point, Liam would realize he wasn't the only one being watched. That could shatter him more than any defeat. But for now, she kept the secret to herself. It was one more variable to consider in her strategy. Meanwhile, Liam remained unaware of his father's presence in the shadows. In his arrogance, he believed he had complete control of the situation. Looking out his office window, he saw the city as a chessboard where he moved the pieces. He didn't suspect that in this game, he himself was merely a pawn. The next morning, Elena shared new developments with her team. The solutions were taking solid shape: waste repurposing, emission reductions, and process optimization. Each result was a victory against time and against Liam's ego. Maya, moved, commented, "If the world knew about this, you'd already be celebrated." But Elena knew there was still a political battle to win. The board remained divided, and Liam wouldn't make things easy for her. She saved her best cards for the right moment. Still, her confidence in her work grew with each step. While working, she received an unexpected message. "We're watching. Keep going." It was unsigned, but she knew exactly who was behind it. Robert Vanderbilt was confirming his silent vigilance. Elena clenched her fist, her determination renewed. Liam, on the other hand, was starting to notice the change in the director's attitudes. Some spoke of Elena with respect. Others showed curiosity about her solutions. This bothered him deeply. What had once been just a bet now seemed like a real threat to his authority. He convinced himself he needed to intervene. If she goes too far, she won't just defeat me, she'll expose me in front of everyone, he thought, as doubt ate away at his confidence. Still, he had no idea that his own father was already setting the stage to observe him at his worst. The revelation that Robert was monitoring everything remained with Elena, like a bomb waiting to explode. The third day began with tension in the air. Elena entered the conference room carrying folders and projections. The directors watched her in silence, waiting to see how far she would go. Liam, seated at the head of the table, wore a cold smirk, but his eyes betrayed his impatience.
Calmly, Elena began presenting her partial results. She explained how specific measures could reduce costs by millions while simultaneously preserving the company's public image. Her delivery was confident, and the data projected on the screen was undeniable. The impact was immediate. Some board members murmured in approval, impressed by the clarity of her solutions. Others, more skeptical, crossed their arms in suspicion. Liam maintained his haughty posture, but with each graph, his heart beat faster. The thought that she might actually win the challenge tormented him. Elena noticed the room's reaction, but didn't let it distract her. She continued steadily, highlighting not just the environmental benefits, but also the financial gains. She translated science into the language of business, something few could do effectively. Maya, watching from the back, felt contained pride. Growing restless, Liam tried to interrupt.
Interesting, but do you really believe such radical changes are feasible in such a short time? Elena looked up and replied without hesitation. The question isn't whether they're feasible. It's whether you'll have the courage to implement them. The silence that followed was deafening. The board was split between shock and admiration. For the first time, some directors saw in Elena not just an expert, but a potential leader. Liam, meanwhile, felt the blow directly. His authority had been challenged in front of everyone. Still, Elena wasn't trying to humiliate him. Her tone remained professional, without arrogance. It was this demeanor that disarmed him more than any data. He expected confrontation, but received serene firmness, which left him unsettled. After the meeting, Liam locked himself in his office. He paced back and forth, disturbed. She can't win. Not in front of me. Not in front of my empire, he muttered. But deep down, he knew his confidence was in ruins. Elena, exhausted but confident, returned to the makeshift office with her team. She knew the battle was far from over, but the first symbolic victory had been won. For the first time, Liam had lost ground to her. The deadline was still ticking, but now the cards were on the table. Elena had proven she wasn't just a player on the board. She was someone capable of changing the game itself. Later that same day, as Elena was quietly celebrating the progress with her team, a senior director met secretly with Liam. His name was Richard Cole, an influential man known for defending the company's traditional methods. "If this woman succeeds in pushing her ideas, we'll lose our edge," he said in a conspiratorial tone. Liam listened in silence, torn between wounded pride and fear of what Elena represented. Richard took advantage of his hesitation to plant seeds of doubt. "She wants to take your place, Liam. Every word she says undermines your authority. You need to act before it's too late." The heir, though he wouldn't admit it, felt the poison spreading.
Meanwhile, Elena was reviewing her strategies with Maya. She noticed that certain documents kept disappearing, but she didn't have time to investigate thoroughly. "Someone is sabotaging us," she said quietly. Maya nodded, concerned. "They know you're close to winning, and it terrifies them." Throughout the company hallways, rumors were spreading. Employees talked about Elena's strength, with some betting she would actually solve the challenge. Others mocked the idea, believing she would just become another victim of Liam's ego. The atmosphere was tense, as if the entire company was about to explode. Richard continued his scheming without pause. He ordered crucial reports to be altered, creating flaws in Elena's calculations. His goal was simple: expose the specialist in front of the board and destroy her credibility. If she failed, Liam would emerge stronger. If Richard succeeded, the company would remain under conservative control. However, Elena noticed inconsistencies in the numbers. Her sharp mind detected subtle manipulations, like puzzle pieces deliberately switched. "They're playing dirty," she remarked, taking a deep breath. "But I won't let them destroy my work." Her determination in her eyes was stronger than ever. Liam, poisoned by Richard's words, began to see Elena as a greater threat. In his mind, this was no longer just about winning the bet. It was about preserving his authority over the empire and in his father's eyes. His paranoia grew with every report he read. Yet something inside him wavered. No matter how hard he tried to discredit her, he couldn't deny the clarity of her ideas. Every line Elena wrote felt like an arrow striking his vanity. The heir seemed trapped between two forces: loyalty to his own pride and the inescapable truth. That evening, Richard met with Liam once more. "If she doesn't fail on her own, we'll need to make sure she does."
Liam's expression hardened. Though he lacked the courage to act directly, the director's influence was steadily pushing him toward the edge. Unaware of the full extent of the conspiracy, Elena kept moving forward. But the pieces were moving against her, setting the stage for the biggest blow yet. The next morning, Elena arrived at the office to find her team in panic. The reports had been corrupted, the graphs vanished from digital folders. Days of work seemed to have evaporated in just hours. Maya was nearly in tears, desperate. "They've destroyed us, Elena. There's no way to recover everything in so little time." Elena, however, took a deep breath and maintained her composure. "If they want to take us down, they'll have to do better than this." Her calm demeanor restored the team's spirit. She knew she would have to rebuild the data from scratch, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Determination was her greatest weapon. At that same moment, Liam received news of the sabotage. Richard was quietly celebrating, certain the specialist had been defeated. But to everyone's surprise, something stirred within the air. For the first time, Liam felt he might have gone too far. A deep discomfort began eating away at him.
When he saw the doctored reports, Liam realized the numbers didn't make sense. Deep down, he knew Elena would never make such amateurish mistakes. His pride prevented him from admitting it publicly, but privately, he recognized this smelled like manipulation. Elena, tireless, gathered old documents and cross-referenced information manually. She worked for hours on end, turning every setback into a new opportunity to prove her competence. Maya, still incredulous, stayed close by her side, impressed by her leader's resilience. "You're unstoppable, Elena," she murmured in admiration. Restless, Liam made an unexpected decision. He discreetly sought out Elena and for the first time offered help. "Whoever did this, it wasn't you. I can grant you internal clearances that will speed up your recovery," he said, his voice hesitant. Elena looked at him, surprised. This was the first visible crack in his wall of arrogance. Reluctantly, she accepted. "If you really want to help, then don't get in my way. Let me do my work." Her steady gaze disarmed Liam, who stepped back. For the first time, he wasn't in control. For the first time, he wasn't the one making the rules. With the new access, Elena recovered crucial data. Within hours, the work rose from the ashes, more solid and organized than before. What seemed like the end had turned into an unexpected comeback. The sabotage, instead of destroying her, had strengthened her position. Richard was furious when he learned what happened. He hadn't expected Elena could be so resilient, nor that Liam would show signs of weakness toward her. For the first time, the director realized the specialist might actually win. At nightfall, Elena looked at the wall filled with reconstructed charts and smiled. "They tried to break me, but they only made me stronger." Deep down, she knew the battle was far from over, but she also knew she was no longer fighting alone. The atmosphere inside Vanderbilt headquarters had shifted. The board, once divided, was beginning to see Elena not just as an expert, but as someone capable of reshaping the company's future. Her clearly reconstructed reports impressed even the biggest skeptics. What looked like defeat had become a demonstration of strength. Liam, however, felt increasingly uncomfortable. Richard's words still echoed in his mind, but they no longer carried the same weight. Quietly, he was beginning to recognize that Elena possessed something he never had: authority earned through merit. It wasn't imposed by inheritance, but by unquestionable competence. Elena, for her part, maintained absolute focus. She avoided direct confrontations with Liam, but every encounter between them grew increasingly charged with tension. He provoked her less, and she noticed the change. His usual sarcasm had given way to an uncomfortable respect, even if masked by stern looks. During a progress meeting, one director tried to mock Elena's work, suggesting her solutions were unrealistic. Before she could respond, Liam intervened. "Perhaps we should hear her out before making judgments." The board fell silent, surprised by his stance. Elena watched him, intrigued.
Gradually, the masks were beginning to slip. Liam could no longer maintain his complete arrogance, and his unwavering defense against Elena was showing signs of wear. Deep down, he was starting to admire her, though he didn't yet have the courage to admit it, even to himself. Richard, watching closely, noticed the shift. In his eyes, Liam was becoming weak, influenced by the specialist's presence. If he's not reined in, that boy could hand the company over to her, he thought, devising new ways to destabilize them. Meanwhile, Elena remained resilient. Her priority was meeting the deadline and presenting a definitive solution. But she couldn't ignore the change in Liam's demeanor. It was no longer pure hostility. There was curiosity, respect, and even a spark of doubt. Maya noticed the shift, even before Elena did. "He's different around you," she commented quietly. Elena shook her head, trying to dismiss the idea. "He's still an arrogant heir. We can't trust sudden changes." But deep down, she knew something new was emerging. The entire company watched the pair as if it were a silent duel between past and future. And with each passing moment, it became clearer that the future belonged to the voice of reason, not to pride. The power struggle, once one-sided, had now become an unstable balance between two opposing forces, and, paradoxically, increasingly interconnected. When the time came to present the final partial results, Elena entered the conference room prepared for confrontation. The board was assembled in full, and the atmosphere was judgmental. Liam, at the head of the table, watched in silence, his eyes still stern but less arrogant than in previous days. Elena began calmly, projecting charts and numbers that demonstrated the effectiveness of her solutions. Cost reductions, improved public image, prevention of fines, everything was there, clear and undeniable. The voices that had once mocked her now fell silent, forced to listen. But Richard wasn't willing to concede. He interrupted with sarcasm. "Numbers on paper are easy, but in practice, how can you guarantee this will work?" Elena met his gaze firmly. "With transparency and accountability, something that seems to have been lost in this company." The silence that followed was heavy. Liam watched, torn between anger and fascination. Elena's courage in facing Richard without hesitation impressed him more than he wanted to admit. With every word she spoke, he felt his own authority crumbling. Yet at the same time, he couldn't help but admire her strength. The board murmured among themselves, some already convinced that Elena's solution was the only viable way out. Others, Richard's allies, remained resistant. The confrontation had transformed into more than a technical dispute. It was fundamentally a clash between two opposing models of leadership. Elena remained composed, even under pressure. She explained how every stage of her proposal had been tested in simulations, and how the financial returns would be both rapid and consistent. Her voice was firm but carried no arrogance, projecting pure confidence. Growing desperate, Richard tried one final move. He accused Elena of manipulating data to impress the board. But before he could continue, Liam cut him off. "That's enough. I've reviewed the reports myself. There's no manipulation." The impact of his words was immediate. Elena looked at him, surprised. It was the first time Liam had publicly taken her side. The board, stunned, realized something fundamental had shifted. Richard clenched his jaw, furious at the heir's betrayal of his own arrogance. Elena seized the moment to conclude her presentation with a powerful statement. "The future won't wait for us. We either adapt or we get left behind." Her voice filled the room, leaving everyone in silence. The meeting ended without an immediate decision, but the impact was clear. Elena had won the attention and respect of the majority. Liam sat quietly, reflecting on what he had just done. For the first time, he had chosen to listen to the truth over his pride. After the meeting, Liam locked himself in his office, caught in a whirlwind of emotions. Elena's words, "We either adapt or we get left behind," echoed in his mind like a hammer blow. For the first time, he felt the weight of his own limitations, something he had always refused to acknowledge. Pacing back and forth, Liam remembered how the company had always been a symbol of power. Now, in front of everyone, an outsider, a woman from a world completely different from his, had exposed its weaknesses. The shock hit not just his ego, but his very identity. The heir had always believed he would inherit the empire as proof of his superiority. But the truth struck him hard. It wasn't money that kept the empire alive, but the ability to adapt. That thought ate away at his pride and made his world crumble. On the other side, Elena wasn't seeking revenge. She was exhausted but determined to finalize her proposal. She knew the real challenge still lay ahead, convincing everyone that this wasn't just about saving a company, but about redefining how it existed in the world. Maya watched her leader in silence, impressed. "You managed to silence Liam in front of everyone," she said, admiringly. Elena, however, took no pride in it. "I don't want to silence him, Maya. I want him to listen. If he doesn't learn now, his empire has no future." As he reflected, Liam received an unexpected call from his father. Robert's voice was calm but firm. "I've been watching everything. Your arrogance nearly destroyed this empire. Are you willing to learn from someone wiser than you?" Liam's silence was his only answer.
The weight of his father's disapproval fell on his shoulders like a heavy burden. He realized it wasn't just Elena judging him, Robert was too. The collapse of his pride was becoming inevitable. Deep down, Liam knew he faced a crucial choice. He could either keep building up the wall of arrogance that isolated him, or he could accept her as someone who possessed what he lacked: vision. With each passing minute, the image he had built of himself was crumbling. For the first time, Liam didn't see himself as the victor. He saw himself as a student, learning from a master. And that recognition, however painful, was the first step toward his transformation. The next day, the conference room was packed. Investors, directors, and journalists waited for the final presentation. The air was heavy, as if the future of the Vanderbilt Empire was about to be decided in that very moment. Liam entered quietly, his expression serious, a stark contrast to his usual arrogant smile. Elena stepped up to the podium with a firm posture. Her eyes conveyed confidence despite her visible exhaustion. She projected the final charts, detailing how her proposal wouldn't just save the company from fines and protests, but could transform it into a global benchmark for sustainability. Her words were clear, objective, and powerful. There was no room for doubt. The numbers were there for everyone to see, and the logic was undeniable. The board murmured, some already convinced, others still hesitant. But no one could deny the strength of what they were witnessing. Richard attempted one last maneuver. He stood and accused Elena of being naive, of risking centuries of tradition. But this time, his voice sounded weak. The audience no longer gave him the same credibility. The attention of many directors was fixed on Elena, not on him. Liam, surprising everyone, rose to her defense. Her solutions aren't just feasible, they're necessary. If we want to survive, we need to change. The impact was immediate. Silence filled the room, and Richard fell quiet, unable to respond to the heir's stance. Elena remained composed, but she felt the weight of Liam's words. This wasn't just support. It was an acknowledgement that her truth had triumphed over his pride. For the first time, they were on the same side. Pressed by the facts and Liam's new posture, the board approved the project.
The decision was met with restrained applause, as if everyone knew they were witnessing the dawn of a new era for the Vanderbilt empire. Journalists documented the moment, highlighting not just the innovation of the proposals, but also the visible change in Liam. The arrogant heir was now bending before Elena's competence.
Elena took a deep breath as she finished her presentation. She felt victorious, but not for defeating Liam, but for proving that truth could prevail over any fortune. Liam, sitting in silence, watched her with something new in his eyes. It wasn't anger nor pride, it was respect, and perhaps the beginning of an admiration he could no longer hide. The day after the approval, headlines filled every newspaper. "The Vanderbilt Empire embraces sustainability," the front pages proclaimed. But more than the corporate shift, what captured public attention was the transformation of Liam Vanderbilt. The young heir, once a symbol of arrogance, now appeared beside the specialist who had proven her worth. Liam walked quietly through the headquarters hallways. Employees, accustomed to his air of superiority, noticed something different. His steps no longer carried the same weight of contempt. He carried himself with a new posture, more reserved, almost humble. For the first time, he allowed himself to observe rather than just be observed. In his office, Liam met with Elena. The atmosphere was tense, but different from their previous encounters. He didn't smile sarcastically, nor did he try to unsettle her. "You won," he said quietly. Elena looked up and replied calmly, "It was never a competition, Liam. It was about the future." Those words struck the heir deeper than any defeat. He realized he had spent his entire life viewing everything as a power game, when the real challenge was building something lasting. For the first time, he felt pride not in himself, but in someone beside him. Elena, pragmatic, prepared to conclude her role in the project. "My work here is done. The implementation is now up to you." But deep down, she knew the battle wouldn't end there. There would be resistance, sabotage, and new challenges. The difference was that now Liam no longer seemed like her enemy. That same evening, Robert Vanderbilt summoned his son for a private conversation. "You've finally begun to understand," the patriarch said. "It's not about imposing, but about listening. It's not about being right, but about doing what is right." Liam listened in silence, absorbing each word like a student before a teacher. The weight of pride finally lifted from his shoulders. He was no longer the young heir trying to prove himself invincible, but a man willing to learn. Elena's presence had shattered his ego, but it had also rebuilt something more valuable in him: humility. Days later, Liam did the unthinkable. He called a press conference. Before the cameras, he publicly acknowledged Elena's role. "We weren't saved by money, but by knowledge, and it's with that strength that we will move forward." His words resonated, surprising everyone, including Elena herself. Maya, emotional, commented to her boss, "You didn't just change the company, you changed the man who seemed impossible to change." Elena smiled faintly without responding. She knew there was still much ahead, but she also knew she had gained something beyond victory. The Vanderbilt Empire was entering a new era. And in the exchanged glance between Liam and Elena, there was not just respect, but the promise that the future could be built together, not through arrogance, but through truth.
Elena won the challenge and shattered the heir's ego. But was this just the beginning of something greater? Subscribe now and don't miss any of our inspiring stories that show how life can change in the blink of an eye.